So this new video is another work that will show the extensive use of these straight line tools here applied to a situation that has a great deal of perspective of things moving into the distance along angles of block forms like boxes and planes and things like this box of yellow mangoes that has a repeating shape that you can fit into that geometric perspective. And I'm not going to talk too much specifically about how these tools are used to discern observational perspective. I'll let the imagery kind of suggest that itself. I think it becomes self-evident that these same methodologies here are effective in tackling some new situations. And I think part of what we're after is again arranging this larger toolkit of ways to approach and compare and discern visual elements, and a greater toolkit of roles for line within the drawing, so to speak. And so here you'll see these straight line tools used in this situation where there's a good deal of difficult perspective that can sort of fool the eye, such as a box of mangoes propped up on a pill bottle at an odd angle, which produces a situation where I'll say that I think that the human eye, while it's always tracking and reading patterns, it's also, because of how we're conditioned, I think often our eyes are fooled because we spend our lives trying to sort of even things out. You have to fit through the doorway and not run into the door jamb. And so there's a way that we want to sort of stand things up straight. And so if you see things at an odd angle, or if you see things moving into space, in drawing, again, if you fall back on your sort of mental image of things, there's a tendency to prop that floor plane up, or to take things that are tipping in odd angles and sort of correct them, so to speak, so that the relationships fall apart. And so this is where, again, this use of angle tool, grid tool, and all these lines of comparison and all these straight line tools, all these things become really, really crucial and quite dynamic in a sense. Another way to look at this, just in terms of how these things create an interesting drawing. I mean, as an artist, you come to a work saying, how can I make this more interesting? This is a role. As an artist, what do you make here interesting, exciting, surprising? I think what one of the things that you get out of this return to geometry, return to the straight line, this use of straight lines to make curved lines, this use of straight lines to make straight directions, but also to sometimes then create circular movements built out of straight lines. What you get out of this, you have a surplus of repetition. One of the fundamental elements of design is repetition and difference. Or another way to look at it is, people describe it as harmony and variety. And then there's a third aspect that you can call continuation. And so these are the things where one thing sort of flows from one to another, and this is how we bind together situations. But in that repetition and difference, the straight line tool gives you a surplus of repetition, a surplus of harmony. And what's exciting about that as an artist is that if you have this return to that straight edge, this return to that angular movement, this return to a particular kind of line, there's a kind of rhythm to that. Again, born out of the physicality of the act, partly. Again, like if you embody this tool, there's a certain kind of rhythm that's built out of the way that you are are plotting your way in waves of movement in layers of lines across the surface. But there's a way that the rhythm within the act, becomes imbued in the drawing. And you don't have to overthink it. It's just there. And there's a way that this surplus of repetition, or the surplus of harmony, allows you to create difference in other ways without the drawing falling apart. If the drawing is all difference, one thing doesn't relate to another, you're going to have a work that's sort of seems. This is where people talk about disjointed work. So instead, what's effective here is you have these things that occur again, and then all those other kinds of things, all these varieties of line I've talked about, can come into play, and it allows it to still hold together. They have this one element of that straight line. Again, not the things are all relative. So the head of the bobblehead, well, it's curved. It's made up of many straight lines overlapped, but it reads as a curve as much as anything because of the other straight lines, right? So this is one important thing to think about in how this stretches out your abilities, and how it actually makes more decisions possible by having this one strategy that has lots of possibilities, but has some core that you are able to use without thinking. If we look back where we left off the last video, if I can just do some visual analysis for a moment, there are a number of events of visual completion happening here in this drawing, both within the source where a variety of things overlap or their edges are obscured by transparency, and in how you will see, how you see this work being drawn. There are instances of disappearing edge where can you take a contour out, and it's still understood where the boundaries of the form are, or the form's boundaries aren't understood, but it still visually makes sense. Or similarly, specificity or detail or activity can be made greater in areas of emphasis. And these are compositional or design-related decisions, but line may also be broken or obscured, or detail or focus lessened in response to spatial form. Look here how the front edges of planes are made more substantial and distant edges more subdued. See how the nearest points are predominantly noted, or how line changes as it moves into space. For instance, along that left edge of the ground plane. That strategic change from foreground to background, diminishing value, diminishing weight, diminishing detail, lessening of focus, etc., is called atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective. And so this is a key strategy for making a visual sense of space, like something that visually looks like space within a drawing. And as this work is developed, you can kind of see that happen here. And if you look back at the history of this drawing from where it's at now, or from an earlier moment in the drawing, this change happens also within those organizing lines. So you'll see change within the axis. That's for instance, like the axis of that pill bottle that's on its side is emphasized and remains emphasized from earlier to this point in the drawing. At another point, the edge that runs through the middle was more more strongly noted, that shares an edge with that box that meets at the middle. The nearest mango in the crate its angle is reaches beyond the form and is prominent, and then there's less of the there's less emphasis of the axis, but a light note of it in the other ones that are behind it, or the line between the bottle on top of the box and the bobblehead figure. Earlier in the drawing was very strongly noted because it's kind of a key connection of a triangle that's happening within this. And here later in the drawing, I'm starting to gradually de-emphasize it by running lines on the interior of the front plane on the front plane of that box. Those directional lines continue that direction, but it's no longer a single line. So this again, making a more interesting movement, not such a simple movement, but something that has a little bit more involvement to it. So this again, the form has a dual purpose. The emphasis or de-emphasis of any line work can be determined for the purpose of the flat design form or the spatial volumetric form, and the tension between those things carries one through the evolution of the work.